you doing?
Michael, I'm doing great. Having the time of my
Terrific.
life right now.
Terrific. All right. So I'm going to give a little bit of preamble. Our show is relatively new. I know that you've been a guest on our other programs several times. For those that don't know, there's our history of LiftPort is nearly 20 years, working originally on the Earth space elevator research project, and then switched gears to the lunar space elevator more than 10 years ago. During the pandemic, all of our funding evaporated, so we wound up doing this weird pivot to host online conferences as a service. So we hosted them for 27 conferences, more than 400 experts on our various programs. We did stuff for International Space University, Mars Society, Moon Society, Foundation for the Future, the Chief Scientist of U.S. Space Force, just to name a few of them. And then as the pandemic is shifting, we're once again pivoting to we're still doing online conferences, but we're only going to do 4 a year. And they're focused on money. They're focused on the finance, capitalization, operations of space, because it's a $500 billion a year industry. It's growing every year. It has been for a long time. The numbers are a little fuzzy, but somewhere between 100 and 200 billion dollars are going into this industry every year as new money, whether it's governmental programs or angel VC, private equity, or public markets. And so we're working to build a knowledge base on this new financial future of space, because we think it's kind of underappreciated, underreported. And so we're going to do that each quarter. DareGreatly.space is the website. And with that, we decided to create this podcast series twice a week, two experts, 2 guests a week. So that's pretty ambitious, and I couldn't do it without my team. So with all that said, Dr. Aldrin, and I'm gonna call you Andy here in a minute, but I always try to be respectful in the first few minutes to remind people, your credentials.
We've known each other too long for that.
We have. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. So with that, I do want to get into your background a little bit. What we're trying to do, the format of the show is, the first few minutes are introductory. I've got some interview questions I'm going to try to ask and get some, a little bit about your own personal history. You have one of the more unique histories in the world. So I think that's something I don't think that's well known or well understood. And with that history, I think that gives you perspective that very few people in the world have. So I'm going to let you kind of tell a little bit of your story first, and then we're going to get into your class, your program as a professor, and then we're going to get into the Aldrin Foundation. So that's kind of the flow of this, and it's a free-form conversation, sir. So let's go with a little bit of your background. How did you get here?
Well, I was read the first part of it. I didn't really have a choice with. I mean, I would just happen to be born to a guy that ended up going to the moon. So that kind of created some interesting opportunities and experiences, and to be honest, was kind of a mixed bag in terms of my career. But I guess the coolest thing was I just got to meet some really, really interesting people and listen to a lot of really interesting conversations. So, but when I started out, I wasn't really a space cadet. I mean, I was interested in space and I wanted to pursue studies in that area, but I was equally fascinated with the Soviet Union. And so my first career was actually as a Sovietologist. And I got my PhD at UCLA, worked at the RAND Corporation, mostly studying space, but sort of defense economics as well, and mostly the Soviet Union. And so I was very, very fortunate. The second really lucky break I guess I had was that, I was in grad school just as the wall came down. So uh, my first trip to the Soviet Union was 86, and then 88. Savdeyev invited me to come out there, which is actually my first year of my PhD program. And so at that point, everything was open. And I was able to go over there and literally talk to chief designers, CEOs of what's now in Energia, Krunichev, Mashinostroyenia, Yuzhnaya, and that the access was just astonishing. And I kind of got to watch a really interesting and I think probably kind of depressing transition from what I think was the greatness of the Soviet space program to, within 10 years, it had all kind of fallen apart. And so,
Right.
By the time I was finishing up, I think the last real research trip I took was in 95. It was what was amazing was the program was still functioning.
Right.
But I'll give you one short anecdote. So the first time I went down to Yuzhnya in Ukraine, which is now the city of Dnipro, they flew me down on the corporate jet, and I went there and I met with the chief designer and had a very interesting conversation about all the things they were doing to adapt. The second time I went there a year and a half later, wasn't on their corporate jet. We took a train to get down there. And literally when we left, they weren't sure they had enough gasoline in the van to get me to the airport. And my friend and I literally hitchhiked at the airport, got a ride on a cargo plane to go to Saratov and the next destination. And so that's kind of how quickly things fell apart there. But really, really, really fascinating times. And sometimes I wish I had taken more pictures and written more stuff down, but I did write my dissertation and some studies and things. And so it was that part was really interesting. And so then the Soviet Union went away,
right,
which did no good for my career because I was a Sovietologist.
Right.
What does a Sovietologist do without the Soviet Union? I had been showing various people around Russia and talking about, kind of what I really understood was how the org chart really worked. I mean, I guess it's the easiest way to describe it. And it wasn't at all what we thought. We thought that the whole thing was really run top down. The military set requirements and they ran the program. And it couldn't have been further from the truth. What happened is defense industry decided what they wanted to do. They got their money from the Central Committee, from Gosplan. They didn't get it from the Ministry of Defense, so they didn't have any control over money. And they managed to co-opt most of the people that were supposed to be watching the defense industries. And so they kind of built what they wanted to build, and the military had to kind of live with it. So it was really, really fascinating and very counterintuitive, I think. But a rich time.
Do you think anything in your dissertation is relevant to today's situation? Just a couple days ago, the saber rattling kind of ended, and they said, hey, we want to stick with the ISS until 27, 28, right? So is there anything in there that might lead to insights to where we are? I know it's a 30-year-old document, but is there anything in there that would give us insight into where we are now?
Not so much that, because the basic thesis was that for innovation to happen, for really large scale transformational innovation to happen, it has to come from the bottom up.
Okay.
And the Soviet Union is really the last place that you would expect to see bottom up innovation. All the innovation was supposed to come from the top down. Right. And mostly what happened, in fact, almost all of what happened in the Soviet Union wasn't innovation, it was emulation. They were copying us. But the one time they did innovate was creating a space program. And it was a bottom-up process. It was a process of entrepreneurship. And so that message, I think, is still relevant today, that it says it's really very hard and very rare to see true innovation coming from the top down. It has to come from the bottom up. And so that message is still very much relevant today. But beyond that, the relationship, I think some of the other things that I looked at in terms of how the defense industrial organizations exerted tremendous power is sort of relevant today. But the funny thing that's happened over the last 10 years is that you no longer have great designers, great engineers running places like an Energia. They're businessmen, and that may be a good or a bad thing. Very, very different from in the Soviet system, where you had the guy who was running the enterprise knew everything about every vehicle, everything that was built, and that was kind of uniquely, I'll say uniquely Soviet, but it was very characteristic of what worked in their system. Now, it's not necessarily the case of what works in our system. Right now, you've got to be a good businessman because, the real rocket fuel is cash, right? It's not
right.
So, yeah.
Hang on just one second. So sorry. I had a tickle in my throat and I was coughing. So let's talk about, you talk about, the Soviet Union's collapse changed the course and trajectory of your career. What would you say was kind of a strength in your career? What would you say were errors or missteps?
Yeah.
You could have predicted
one of the weird things is, so my degrees where I got a PhD in political science, I actually took Logsdon's space policy program before it was a space policy program.
For those that don't know, that's John Logsdon, emeritus at George Washington University, one of my professors, and a really brilliant guy who has a great history, he's got his arms around the history of the space program. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
And, his between John and the Rand Corporation, it sort of hammered into my head a sense of realism. But anyway, so then I ended up getting an MBA, and so I went to TRW for a couple of years and ended up at Boeing and ended up running advanced program strategy and business development for Boeing's NASA business and then for their launch business. And here I am, and as far as I could tell at the Boeing company, I was the only PhD in political science. And I had, in terms of, if you look at the R&D portfolio, a lot of people, a lot of very, very, very smart engineers working for me. But they could design incredible things. They just didn't know whether they were incredible businesses. And so I was good at that. And that was that was the strength that I brought in. And it's sort of something that that kept me going. And it was, I remember, so I was at Boeing for a while and then got thrown into ULA, which was one of the more challenging parts of my career. We can come back to that maybe. And then I went and ran Moon Express, which was a different kind of challenge. But one of the things that's really, the two things that were fascinating was when I came in there first day, I'm in front of we had a brilliant group of engineers and very, very, very creative, very and talented. And I came in there and I told them my background, and I'm looking at them, looking at each other, going, "What the heck have we done here? We hired a Sovietologist to run the company." But without getting into the details of my departure, when I left, the entire engineering staff resigned. And I took that as a tremendous compliment. Because, so somewhere along the line, I got all that stuff right.
Moon Express was an early competitor for the Google Lunar X Prize. Is that right?
Yeah, we were for a time kind of considered the leading competitor. Right. And we captured two of the actually, I think we captured 3 of the Google Lunar X Prize interim prizes. And so I was pretty proud of doing that. But things kind of blew up shortly after that, literally.
We have an entire industry that doesn't know its history and doesn't know just how many things have blown up financially, economically, and physically, how many things have blown up in our industry. We are literally standing on the shoulders of giants to be here in the first place. So
well, this is the third wave, is what I call it. And so,
right.
the first wave, we had a tremendous amount of really cool stuff going on with the shuttle, believe it or not, in the mid 80s. And you had a tremendously supportive government set of policies, and it was really pushing a lot of risk to industry. It all looked really good. And if you look at things that are successful today, we were doing them then. Max Faget's industrial space facility. We were commercializing remote sensing. We were doing small launch vehicles. Not that those are terribly successful today, but at any rate, a lot of the stuff we talk about today was happening then. And the difference was, I hope, it was a fragile system. And when the shuttle failed tragically, it took everything with it. Right. It wasn't just the astronauts, but it was a commercial industry as well. And then, the second wave, Iridium took the commercial down with it. And so again, it was a fragile ecosystem. I think our system today is much more robust in terms of breadth and strength of financing. But I mean, there's still vulnerabilities.
Well, let's definitely talk about those vulnerabilities. We're going to come back to that in a minute, but I mean, that's one of the reasons why we have this program in the first place, is to kind of uncover some of that stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about your own personal motivations. Have you stepped on any landmines you want to talk about? Lessons learned from that? I certainly have. I've always been very transparent about my landmines. Quicksand.
So, I don't know. Maybe one landmine and one bog.
Okay, quicksand. Bog. I like bog. Yeah. Yep.
The quicksand of the bog was ULA, and that's that was just. It was a really, really challenging place to be, particularly if what you're trying to do is grow a business. And I think it was frustrating because there were things that we wanted to do, things that we had capabilities to do that we just couldn't do because of the structure, in part because it was a joint venture owned by Lockheed or Boeing, and neither one of them wanted us competing with them. That didn't leave a whole lot of open space to compete. Okay. And so that was frustrating. That was a challenging time, but about
when was that? I'm not clear on the time.
2007 is when, late 2006 is when we opened our doors. I mean, we actually got the merger through the SEC and all that kind of great stuff. And it was, the mistake there was mine, that I thought we were going to be able to pursue space transportation at writ large and do things with the capabilities that we had that would have been great. But shortly after I had basically signed up, then Mike Griffin came in, and Mike Griffin said, because when this whole thing started, we were going to be flying Delta IV was going to be the basis for heavy lift. Yeah. And then Griffin came in and said, no, it's not. I'm building my own rocket, damn it. Right. And so that was, I think at that point, I'm not sure I could have gotten out, but at any rate, I didn't do good strategic planning there. And so anyway, I slogged through the bog. I left that, and then kind of, I'd have to say MoonX was probably the landmine. And I mean, it wasn't, it was great for me personally, because I always wondered whether I could run a small business, a startup. I always wondered what was happening in that whole environment. and I wanted to get on the right side of history, and all that worked. And
Right.
I found out I really could do that. And I also found out that, at the end of the day, it's a lot of work to do that. And so it was a great experience, man. I'm glad I got through it, but it was a little bit of a landmine.
That was your first kind of bite at the entrepreneurial apple, though, right?
In a sense, yeah. I mean, I'm still chewing on the entrepreneurial apple. It's
No, but that was your first one. I know that that's your whole bread and butter now, to kill all the food analogies, but that was your first one where it was a small team, always trying to figure out how to get funded, always trying to figure out how to hit new milestones. Where's the capital coming from? How do we keep this small team dynamics? How do you keep a fragile ecosystem going? So let's dig into that a bit, because pretty much every entrepreneur, whether they're doing a yoga studio or building a space company, they're all dealing with those core problems. But then if that was your first experience in the entrepreneurial world, what was that like for you? And I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I'm looking.
No. I mean, it was. I'm not sure what the right metaphor, but it was absolutely crazy. It was an environment where all of the stuff you're talking about was happening all of the time, and everything was moving, and everyone was trying to establish order. And so I think one of the things that I learned that's kind of critical and important is most of the companies that I see starting up with, you've got 2 or 3 guys that are the founders, and that's hard. I mean, I really think that, and this is something that I've carried through to, I suppose I'm an educational entrepreneur because I'm on my second startup with an educational program. And one of the things I've learned is it works best if I'm just doing it. Yeah. And I don't, and the other thing is, well, I mean, it's obviously a very different environment when you're working in a university, different kinds of challenges. But I think that's one of the important things that I learned is it's really important to just have clarity of what your plan is, what your planning is. And the plan changes on a daily basis. And so it's, one of the things I learned is you can't plan and build a program the same way you build a program at Boeing, even if it's sort of an internal research and development program. And what you have to do is plan based on risk and burning down risks rather than schedules, rather than money, because you don't know how much money you're going to get. You don't know what kind of schedules you're going to hit. But ultimately, you have to focus the resources you've got on the things that are most important. And risk management is a good way of doing that. One of the things I like to say about strategy is that strategy, when you boil it down to the simplest thing, is the allocation of scarce resources. I mean, it all kind of comes down to that. And so what it ends up being is as much about what you choose not to do as what you choose to do.
Right.
And so that's hugely important. And risk management as a tool kind of provides some clarity to that.
We struggle with that right now. I mean, in the intro, my history, we have pivoted and pivoted and pivoted and pivoted just to stay alive, right? The big pivot, obvious, is from Earth elevator to lunar system, right? So that's a giant life-changing decision there. And then we had some soul-searching moments when COVID hit. Like, what's our next step? What are we going to do? And the choice was just stay alive. We can't build anything. We can't do the things we want to do right now. Just stay alive. And we did. We got through it. And now, the team was talking just this week about what are our next steps, and how do we get back to building infrastructure for the moon? So I'm really glad to hear you from a very personal perspective. That advice is very real to me right now. So, thank you. That's actually super useful to me. So let's talk about the school a little bit. Since we're talking about strategy, we're talking about lessons learned, we're talking about experiences. Let's talk about Embry-Riddle. It's to me, it's a relatively new program.
It is.
So share with us what's.
I'm going to start with Florida Tech, because it all kind of started there, and as you know, you were involved in this with International Space University. We got selected to start a program, and this was a true startup mentality, because Florida Tech gave me a lot of leeway. They didn't give me a lot of money, but they let me run it more or less as a business. And so I had to scramble it was retail marketing to pull in every student. And I was doing really, really well if I got 20 students. But what we did, we pulled together a pretty great program. We brought faculty in from around the world, and Greg Autry participated in it. Every year we ran the program. Henry Hirschfeld from GW, and so Angie Buckley from ISU, as well as aerospace. And so, and then we would bring in lots of experts. And the first year we ran the program, the program consisted of it was just a graduate certificate. So there were 4 courses. And the idea is that students that are pursuing MBAs, engineering degrees, could take these 4 courses and apply them to whatever degree. And so we're pulling students in from around the globe as well. But we did the first year, we ran it at the visitor complex at Kennedy Space Center. And
crazy venue. That's a great.
Where students would literally walk out of the classroom and they would be standing underneath the shuttle Atlantis. So it was an astonishing thing. The bad news was they didn't have any time to enjoy it, because we did 4 classes in 6 weeks. And so that was a little bit too much. And we were going to adjust that, and we had a plan. And of course, that all changed with COVID. So year 2, we ran the program online synchronously, and it was a phenomenal program. We had hoped to be able to get to the visitor complex for a week or 2, but we couldn't do that. But great class. And one of the things they taught me was you really can do this stuff online. And we stretched it out to 10 weeks, which was a lot more sane. And then the 3rd year we did a hybrid, which was really, really cool. So we did 8 weeks online with daily lectures, and then 2 weeks at the visitor complex. And that gave us time to visit all of the really cool things you've got there. Look at rockets, look at OneWeb, was fully operational at that point. We didn't get a launch, incredibly. The first year we got a Falcon Heavy night launch, second Falcon Heavy night launch the first year. Anyway, so that worked. And unfortunately, Florida Tech didn't really adapt all that well to COVID, and it wasn't working out. And so I went to Embry-Riddle. Actually, Greg Autry and I went to Embry-Riddle to talk to them about just maybe teaching classes or something. And then Greg went off to Thunderbird and left me holding the stick. But that worked out okay. And they came to me and said, you know what, the board came back and they want you to start a fully blown master's program. They want to do it now. And so that was, we started last August. So we've just finished over a year now. And this is like running an entrepreneurial company. We cobble together the courses that we have, but I'm daily building new courses. And the program is 100% online. It's asynchronous. So I'm literally writing like a book for every course, because it's a 50-page document with embedded lectures and all kinds of stuff like that. And last I checked, we had 288 students admitted into the program. Not all of them are in classes yet, but it has been incredibly successful. And you know, the way I measure success is not just the number of students. That's all great. It's the quality of the work. And there are two kinds of things that I've noticed. So one is the top 20, 30% of the students I have at Embry-Riddle are better than students I've had anywhere. And I thought at Florida Tech, we were bringing people in from around the world, and we had great students, but these students just blow me away. The other thing is the things that are most rewarding are the students in the middle, some of whom come in and are from other programs, and maybe they're only taking one class in the master's program, but and they don't know which way the rocket goes, which way is up. and so they're a little bit intimidated to start out with, but by the end, I've had a handful, maybe 10 students who have turned out to turn in really, really great project work, and those are the ones that really make me feel like we're accomplishing something with the program. So we are evolving the program over time, and it's really kind of the focus of it is very much it's interdisciplinary, but most of the classes are organized by industry. So you've got launch industry, communications, remote sensing. And you start out by understanding the customer, the market, and then you move on. You'll only then do you actually start to design a technical solution. So for most courses, you design some kind of a business concept, but you don't get to talk about engineering until you've understood the market. And so, you know, it's like I said, cash is the rocket fuel. Yeah, so I'm really happy with the way that's coming together. It's
what are the modules? Which one?
Yeah. So I'll give you the quick structure of it right now. So there are 4 overarching courses in policy and law, technology and systems, program management, and ecosystem overview, which is an overview of all of the markets. And those cover just everything. And ideally, students do those first, but we don't have any prereqs, and we're fine-tuning things. But then we have courses that, as I said, are industry aligned. So we've got a launch course, we've got a communications course, I'm building a remote sensing course, there'll be a human space flight and a space science course. And all of these courses kind of have a similar format where you design some kind of a business. That's your course project, something you're working on every week. You have some kind of a presentation to make on your business concept. And it starts out with, you know, you talk about what's the overall market? How do you make money? What are the value propositions? What's a regulatory political environment? And what's the overall market? What's your real, no kidding, obtainable market? And work from a total available market down to something that you can really hone in on, and recognizing that you've got to focus on what somebody's going to give you money for. And then you go build it. And we don't spend a whole lot of time on engineering. And I think over the longer term, I'd like to build a separate track that's much more engineering focused, but it would be focused on, you know, rather than kind of classic propulsion guidance systems, it would focus on a type of system. So you would do an engineering class on designing launch vehicles, designing remote sensing systems, things like that. And so the idea is focus on real stuff. Not that good engineering is good engineering; it's very important, but you know, focus on the end products. Anyway, that's where we're headed. I'm really interested in resurrecting the summer program, and I think we're going to do that, but not this summer, probably next summer, where we're going to come back to the Kennedy Space Center and for a couple of weeks and have a great time there, and do, you know, 4 courses over the course of the summer. Anyway,
brilliant. That sounds like a terrific course.
I just have to say so, because I've done ISU. I love ISU. This borrows a lot from ISU philosophy, but I think what what it brings in is more academic structure.
Well, the thing that makes ISU, and for those that don't know, I'm the past president of the U.S. Alumni Association, so I certainly have some bias towards International Space University. But what I have told hundreds of students who have, been interested is that ISU is a wide but not deep education.
Exactly right.
Right? It's wide. You're going to go in, and in the same afternoon, you're going to get a class on why your eyeballs change shape in space, but you're also going to get a class on the Outer Space Treaty, and you're going to get a class on project management, and it's wide but not deep. But there are specialty schools. If you want to learn orbital mechanics, go to MIT. If you want to learn space law for the moon or satellites, go to Ole Miss. If you want to learn space law for treaties, go to George Washington. Like, there's places that are specialist programs. And so what I'm hearing, if I'm understanding this correctly, sir, is that it's not a specialist program where you only learn one thing, but it's also not wide. It's not as wide, but it's much deeper, right? Because of the focus.
Exactly correct. So I'll just give you an example. So policy and law at ISU, you kind of study policies and countries and things like the end result. Right. What we do in policy and law is we start with a framework, and the framework is National Space Innovation System. It's a sort of a derivation of national innovation systems. But you look at the overall structure, and so you understand what the exogenous forces are: technology, economics, geopolitics, and then you start looking at what the underlying system is, the educational, the economic system, and then you finally get to the sort of policy making process, and then the output of space systems. It's sort of like it's like an iceberg. Right. Okay. Most of the programs out there today focus on the tip of the iceberg. We're teaching the iceberg, and that holds with the other courses. I like to have a framework to every course that explores the why things happen, why things work, not just what it is or how. Right. So that'd be the best way of characterizing it. But I think you did a great job. It is not as wide. It is deeper. And in some ways, John Logson's course was phenomenal. It taught me a lot about things, and it was very historical. Right. It didn't teach me much about what the political structure was behind it. And so I'm a political scientist, so I think about those things. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the sort of underlying markets and what really drives the space economy that I bring into the program. So I hope that I know students are coming out with an understanding of why things happen the way they happen, because the dynamics of the environment when we're right now, we don't have a clue what it's going to look like in 20 years. We don't. But if you can teach students what to look for, what the signposts of the emergence of, let's just say, geospatial economy is going to be, then you're providing real value, I think.
That's one of the reasons why we're paying attention to the money, because we think that is the most accurate crystal ball in an environment that's very, very murky. If you can watch the capital flows, at least you have an idea what's coming next.
So I would, I agree with you mostly.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say I watch the markets. Watch the markets.
Okay.
Watch people, what the underlying demand is. So I mean, it's like communications. There is a massive and very mature trillion and a half dollar communications market. And by the way, it mostly sucks. It does. And so you need to understand the dynamics. I mean, it's bad because you've got a ton of companies providing lots of data, and they're providing more and more data all the time. Customers are demanding more and more data all of the time, and they are paying less and less for it. It's not a great place to be in that sense. So you've got to understand that. And what it tells you if you're in the space business is technologically, you're never going to compete with fiber. You're probably not going to compete with 5G. And so you have to find really profitable niches where you can be very profitable. And the other thing about space systems is we are tremendously capacity limited. Even Starlink it maxes out at a couple of Ed Crawley's students wrote a great paper on the capacity of we'll call it Starlink 1, the 4,000 satellite version, and it kind of maxes out at about 16 terabits. If you go crazy, you can get to 20.
Okay,
that's nothing. That is
right. That's just to power the world. No, you can't do that. Right.
And you think about it's less than 5% of the total market. You think about what happens when you get to capacity. Remember, you've got customers who want 10% more data every year and who want to pay 10% less every year. If you're at capacity, that's a vicious circle.
That's what killed Iridium during their first startup, right? Because
Iridium died for many reasons.
Yeah. But they were competing against ubiquitous deployment of cell towers that were a whole lot easier than putting cell towers in the sky. So I've kind of wondered about that a little bit. I mean, it's a good cash flow if you're first to market. I think it's proving pretty well for SpaceX, but second, third, fourth carrier markets, I don't know that that's. I'm curious to see where that goes.
What I'll tell you is that if SpaceX is going to, if you just look at the residential market, they're going to be really, really pushed to get a positive return on their investment. We actually ran a model of this. So they're doing what they are doing. They need to do it, which is, they're going to aviation. They're going to remote
cruise ships, that sort of stuff.
Business. And so the question then becomes, is how big is that market?
Yeah. And
we don't really know, but is it big enough to sustain a 40,000 satellite constellation? I don't know. I mean, that's and that's not a passive aggressive. I don't know.
Right. No, the market hasn't determined that yet. No. No. It's pretty good cash flow for now, but we know that there's other systems coming online. What does the future look like when we have 80,000 satellites in the sky? And that's just the starting point. There was an announcement maybe 3 months ago about a super constellation of 300,000, which I don't know if that's even credible. But people made an announcement and they paid for a press release. So we'll see if that one comes online. So the night sky is going to change a lot soon.
But somebody has to, this does get back to the money. Somebody's got to come up with the investment for that. But one of the things that I've learned is capital isn't all that smart.
That's going to be the quote of the day, I think.
Look at small launch.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the numbers are right now, but it's billions of dollars, which it isn't a huge amount of money, but probably tens of billions of dollars have been invested in that business. Yep. And the business can sustain, we estimated, we did a study on this with three launchers.
Oh, I don't agree with that. 3 launchers?
3 launchers 30 times a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go through the analysis with you sometime.
I'm curious because I think it's if you build it, they will come model. It's going to take a while though. I mean, nobody. I wrote a paper on Starship Singularity about we have no idea what to do with this mammoth capacity that's being announced. If it comes online, but so far they're doing the steps to bring that thing online. So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of capacity, but yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the small launch.
Let's just chat about Starship.
Yeah.
So the underlying up mass demand, strip away constellations for a moment, is 400, 430 tons a year.
Right.
We have capacity for right now. We've got a capacity for 1,100, 1,200 tons a year, something like that. Just everything that's there right now. So right now we've got a tremendous overcapacity in theory.
Yep.
So Starship, if they launch 50 times a year, in 3 years would launch as much up mass as humanity has launched since the beginning. Right.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you strip away China, go back to your 430s, they call it 300, they would launch the entire up mass demand into 2 launches, which, and so you kind of have to back off and go, all right, let's start looking at what more reasonable scenarios are. And so let's just say Starship launches everybody's constellation. They all jump on Starship. And they can do this in 5 years, easy launching 20 times a year, something like that. And actually at a 20 launch a year launch rate, you're looking at the 10,000 employees SpaceX is supporting right now.
Right.
It actually, you've got launches that are probably under $200 million for 150 tons, which isn't a bad deal. The problem comes once you've launched out the constellations and you go down to 5, 7 launches a year, the cost goes way up. And so it just requires rethinking, which I think is where you're at.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there is a world in which it becomes a warehouse in space. So Starship takes a bunch of stuff up there, and you've got a bunch of tugs that are moving things around, and all kinds of things like this. And that is it is a conceivable and admittedly incredibly efficient and beautiful world. The question is, can we undertake that?
Right. We're not there yet.
No. How long will it take? And can Starship survive until then?
His tweeted, and I said that on purpose, his tweeted goals, and I really hate talking about him as Elon Musk because it's a 10,000, 12,000 person company. It's a bunch of folks working together really hard. But Musk's stated tweeted goal is 3 launches a day, 1,000 trips a year at 100 tons apiece. That kind of capacity means you can build you could launch the entirety of the International Space Station in a weekend. Right? So that's how much capacity. But so I'm not saying they're going to hit it overnight. And what goes up there? Like I don't care how big your Martian ambitions are. 300,000 tons a day. Right. I'm curious to see where that goes. But given his track record with a 98.9% success rate on his current launch vehicles,
don't get me. I mean, but SpaceX, the launch business was a relatively easy and sane case to make.
Yep.
We were down to 1 launch vehicle, and ULA was charging, I'll just say very, very high rates.
Very high. Yep.
But ULA was, I think, the first profitable launch company, because everybody else before that was losing money. And so, but it all sounded plausible. And I was sitting at ULA at the time, and we knew, well, I won't say we collectively, but the few of us there tried to, well, and I'll say leadership understood this. We could never get the board to buy into it, but that they were going to eat our lunch.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
And in part they did by pricing, I think pricing below what their true costs were, but you get to do that. And there's nothing stopping us from competing with that other than sanity. I mean, I don't think ULA was ever going to price at substantially below profit for an extended period of time. But but the point is, Falcon 9 was easy. It made sense. Starship requires us to completely rethink space. And space, there's always space about any industry is about balances.
Well, and that's why I refer to it as a singularity, because we really can't predict what happens once that capacity, if that capacity is reached.
Well, okay, let me just one last thought.
Yeah,
I forget who it was, but someone got up at a conference, and I think she was involved in the Starship lunar lander, and she said, just forget about the notion that you have to worry about mass, and that is part of the rethinking that we have to do.
Right.
It's just that's twisting an awful lot of people's brains in uncomfortable ways, and that takes time, and it's time. So I don't know. It's going to be. I'm just loving the fact that I don't have a dog in the fight.
Right.
I just get to watch.
Yeah. No, it's going to be. I'm curious. You've got 280 some students that have gone through your program. I want to stick with that for a minute longer. We've only got 10 minutes left. How many of those business plans have taken Starship into account, or are they looking at other launch capabilities?
Yeah, so a lot of them are taking Starship into account.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so it depends. So I taught a class on launch systems, the launch industry, and a lot of the students chose to do in-space transportation. A lot of students looking at lunar landers, and a lot of students were using Starship as their launch vehicle because magically it makes their business case close.
Right.
So that's okay. Yeah, but I think that by the end of the class, as students are kind of wrapping up their final presentations, they do get much more of a note of realism to it. But most of the students today really do believe that SpaceX is going to do the things they say. And I have already suffered once by, I won't say betting against Elon. I suppose in a certain sense, I bet a chunk of my career against him, but he wasn't there at the time. At any rate, I wouldn't bet against him. I would not bet against him. I think I won't be hugely surprised if Starship flies. I will be pretty surprised if it flies and comes back. That's the hard part, right? Getting into space is easy. Yeah. I will be really surprised if it flies more than 10 times a year.
If it flies 10 times a year, that still changes the world. I guarantee that things change after. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And I'll tell you what is a plausible scenario is that Starship takes over NASA's heavy lift. And that makes all the sense in the world. And you can look at it and say, NASA's spending about $3.5 billion a year right now on heavy lift. And if Starship took that money, they could do an awful lot with it. The question then becomes, could NASA actually afford to build anything to put on top of it?
Right.
And that's
right. I've seen that scenario played out online for a while. I really don't know what to make of it. I don't think the NASA's going to give that up. I think pardon me, sorry. I think SLS is going to be I think SLS might stick around longer than people expect because going back to your comment earlier about the forces behind those decisions. Yeah. Let me switch for a few minutes longer to talk about your foundation.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about it. I don't think most people know. If I didn't know you personally, I wouldn't have known about it. So let's talk about it and what's going on and what's next.
Yeah. So I mean, here's in a sense, one of the premises behind the foundation is to bring space into the classroom. And I like to say, this is not my father's space program in the future. It's not your father's space program in the future either, because when we were growing up, we were all observing space. A few thousand people got to participate. Very few people got to actually go into space. The rest of us watched. Today, everybody is going to participate. Kids that are in school today are going to apply for jobs on the moon. It's not going to be just as an astronaut.
Right.
We have kids in a high school in Las Vegas building satellites right now as we speak. There are middle school kids that are building satellites, and so we're looking for ways to expand that access. We've got we really started with these massive moon and Mars maps that we have rovers and all kinds of lessons, and kids get to drive around the moon and Mars and come up with really, really incredible stuff. But what sets us apart a little bit is we develop curricula that's in the classroom, meeting standards on a day-to-day basis. So it's stuff that the teachers are teaching in order for them to be successful and for them to meet standards and interest items. So we work very closely with the districts, with the teachers, with training. I think someone's telling me that we're in a total of 700 schools. We're really focusing on, we're in 3 of the biggest districts in the country, 3 of the top 10 districts in the company and the country. So yeah, it's moving along, and it's a little bit outside of the educator world. Out of the space world, because we are fundamentally it's about education. And so yeah, we're really excited about some of the things that we're doing with the foundation, and it's very cool when you can see kids light up.
Do teachers at an individual level get in touch with you, or are you going really for districts at a
We typically go into districts because what we're trying to do is write curricula for the district against state standards. So typically we'll go in and talk to the superintendents and their directors of science education. It's not just science, by the way. We're doing English language arts. We're writing curricula for library sciences, because if a kid loves space, go tell them how to find information at the library on space. And so, kids love 2 things: space and dinosaurs.
Space
and,
and dinosaurs.
They get over dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They don't get over space. But anyway, that's what we're doing. We are really, really excited about some of the things we've got going just right now. And yeah. Great.
I would recommend anybody to go to the site, to check it out.
Aldrinfoundation.org.
Yep.
And you can see the things we're doing. But yeah, it's something that's a little bit different from most typical space education programs.
I know for sure at least one teacher is going to be watching this show, and probably one other, because they're friends of mine, and just
send them my way.
Yeah, I will, absolutely. And so the step is for the teacher to get in touch with y'all, then go back to the school district, and then that's how you'd open that school district up. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just start a conversation and figure out who to go talk to. I mean, we
Awesome.
work with really big school districts. We work with some small school districts, and so
I know of at least four groups. We just did some events with the Mars Society. They're also trying to get into schools. So that's where we all have to be. We all have to put effort into those early students who are trying to figure out what their future looks like. So I applaud that, sir. I'm really glad that you're doing that work.
Hey, and tell Bob we'd love to work with him too, the Mars Society.
Dr. Zubrand is my next guest on Wednesday, so I will definitely make that connection.
That'll be a very different conversation, I think, than the one.
Yeah. All right, sir. Dr. Aldrin, we really appreciate your time. I'm so grateful that you've been, an enthusiastic and willing guest on many of our programs. For those that don't know, they can find it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/LiftPort. There's lots of stuff there. Andy, really great having you, sir, and we look forward to having you back. And I'll send you a separate message about our conference coming up.
Sure.
We'd love to have you there.
Absolutely. Okay, Michael, thanks for having me on. It's always fun.
Thank you. Happy Halloween. Bye-bye.